Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Scotland at 7. I'm Gordon Ross, and in the studio this evening with me is my special guest, Callum Reid, who is the Communications Officer for the Young Scots for Independence. Welcome to the show, Callum.
Hello.
And we'll be talking to him just shortly. But before we do that, our first story this evening, of course, has to be about Boris Johnson and his trip to Luxembourg today. With less than 7 weeks until the UK is due to leave the European Union, Boris Johnson was in Luxembourg today. He had a working lunch with the EU President Jean-Claude Juncker, and the aim of the meeting was to take stock of the ongoing technical talks between the EU and the UK to discuss the next steps. Rhetoric from both suggested that the positions remain far apart. President Juncker recalled that it is the UK's responsibility to come forward with legally operational solutions which are compatible with the withdrawal agreement. But Mr Johnson pulled out of a joint conference with the Luxembourg Prime Minister Xavier Bettel, citing the noise from protesters outside. Mr Bettel, however, went ahead with the press conference on his own with an empty lectern beside him. So, remarkable scenes today, Callum, with Boris Johnson vanishing again. Backdoor Boris seems to have done another bunk.
I don't even think he got in the back door.
He didn't. Maybe went out the back gate.
I'm completely surprised and still in the initial shock that Boris Johnson was even allowed in the Foreign Office, let alone to be Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. I think a lot of people feel the same.
You think he's just unsuitable for the task completely?
Well, completely unsuitable. I mean, if you remember, I think it was during 2014 referendum, Blair McDowell from the No campaign said that Boris Johnson would never be Prime Minister of this country.
Should have put money on that.
I should have put money on that.
Or against it. So there's Johnson. He's in Luxembourg, and he seems to have achieved nothing, the square root of zero. And as far as I could see, and I watched the press conference with Xavier Bettel, and Xavier Bettel was cheered and applauded by the crowd for his comments, where he basically mocked, I think, in a gentle way, he mocked Mr Johnson, his whole approach, and the fact that he wouldn't turn up just because there were a few demonstrators nearby seems to be following a pattern with Johnson, doesn't it? In the same way that when he appeared at Bute House to meet with the First Minister, he wouldn't even come out the front door to meet the crowd. I mean,
we've got a Prime Minister that's, quite frankly, scared of the public, scared of public scrutiny, scared of even Parliament. That's not a democracy. That's... No.
You think he's a man who's been promoted well beyond his abilities?
Oh, yeah.
And he's out of his depth, perhaps?
Yeah. I mean, if you thought Theresa May was bad, look at what we've got now.
Well, but Theresa May looks like an established professional by comparison, doesn't she? Johnson, according to Reuters here, is to explore a Brexit deal with Juncker over lunch of snails and salmon. I think snails is a very appropriate meal, considering the speed at which the United Kingdom has been moving over Brexit. Yeah. According to this report from Reuters, Prime Minister Boris Johnson will explore his chances of securing a Brexit deal over lunch with European Commission Chief Jean-Claude Juncker on Monday, after a weekend rhetoric from both suggesting that their positions remain far apart. Now, the fact that he's having to have lunch with the outgoing President of the European Council to sound him out suggests to me that Boris Johnson really is very unsure of himself here.
No, there's no plan. I mean, this is a quote here. Johnson claimed that a lot of work on possible alternatives, yet he won't tell his own MPs what the alternatives are. He won't tell Parliament. He won't tell the country. I don't even think he knows what any of this is.
It could well be that, as Dominic Cummings was saying about the actual Brexit negotiations, that they're a sham, and there actually are no negotiations. There's no plan, and they're not actually thinking of any solutions at all. And all of this is really, it just seems to be temporising. It's just treading water until he runs out of time.
I can
read a quote from Mr Johnson, and I mean it is basically contentless rhetoric. He says here, I believe passionately that we can do it, and I believe that such an agreement is in the interests of not just the UK but our European friends. and this is from his article in the Daily Telegraph, he's quite good at putting things in writing and not so good at actually turning them into actions.
But this is the Prime Minister who, quite frankly, I wouldn't believe a word he says. I don't think your viewers or the majority of the people of Scotland would believe a word he says. Well, even if it's in writing.
Even David Cameron said he didn't trust them.
No.
So he seems like the most inappropriate man to lead a country that there has ever been. And yet here he is. A crowd of journalists had gathered outside the expected meeting place, the Bouquet Garni restaurant, an 18th century building with bare stone walls and low ceilings, in the medieval heart of Luxembourg, which has snails and salmon on its €34 set lunch meal. Not exactly pushing the boat out, €34 set meal. Obviously, the European Union is not willing to waste the money on a big meal for somebody like Boris Johnson. And while Johnson and his ministers have in recent days talked up progress in the negotiations with Brussels, the EU side has consistently sounded less optimistic and emphasising that Britain must come up with some new ideas. But not just ideas. It's all very well to come forward with ideas, but these have to be ideas that are workable. Yeah. And nothing seems to have been forthcoming.
There's nothing forthcoming, as you just said, but what is workable? Brexit is not workable. Brexit is the biggest disaster to happen to the country. It's not, we see the Yellowhammer documents coming out, fuel shortages, medicine supply breakdown, delays at Calais.
It's going to be gridlock on the motorway network as well, according to the reports from Yellowhammer.
I don't know how any sensible government can go around and say, we're going to leave with no deal because it's great, and it's not great. Well, these are people's lives put at risk.
It's interesting that you should say that, because even Jean-Claude Juncker himself has said there are many in the UK who view a no deal positively, without considering the implications both on the islands and on the continent. It would be unholy chaos, and we would need years to put things back in order. This is coming from the outgoing President of the European Commission. And he's basically, like most of Europe, is looking on incredulous at the way Britain is basically shooting itself in both feet over Brexit. There are many, many reports actually today, even more over here from the Press Association, which give more detail on this. Let me just find one here for you. Johnson has claimed that, and I'm quoting here, a lot of work had been done on possible alternatives to the backstop, and that work would now accelerate. And he says this, he said, over the last couple of weeks there's been a lot of work. Papers have been shared, but we are now at a stage where we really have to start accelerating the work. That was the agreement today. Yeah. So basically they've agreed that it's time Britain started doing some work. And this is 3 years into the process, and we're how many days away now? It's not long, is it?
45, I think.
45. It's over. It's a month and a half or something, isn't it, before the Brexit deadline?
That quote right there is just just sums the Brexit process up. This new government came in and sat on its hands for the summer.
And issued an awful lot of speeches with no content, and his other comment was he said he still thought there was a good chance of the UK and EU agreeing a Brexit deal. What does that even mean, a good chance? It means nothing. If he'd said there was a 50% chance or a 75% chance, well, then you've got some information in the sentence, but here vagaries.
EU nationals across the length and breadth of Britain hearing there is a good chance of a deal, that isn't enough to protect their rights. That isn't enough. That's not what they're looking for. They're looking for either to stop Brexit or for a good deal. And there is no better deal than staying in the European Union. It's not.
It's always been the case that Brexit was the cake that you couldn't have and eat, because the whole idea of Brexit was that being out of the EU would still allow the United Kingdom to have exactly the same market access, the same rights and privileges, but without having to pay any membership fee or abide by any other rules. It's basically, what's the point of the EU if every member state took that attitude? There wouldn't be a European Union.
But I wasn't old enough to vote during the Brexit referendum, but I don't recall seeing anywhere that a Brexit vote would lead to fuel shortages or a catastrophic cliff edge.
They didn't put that on the side of the bus.
The breakdown of UK democracy.
Yeah.
Or the showing that Scotland is not a truly equal partner in the Union, because we've been totally ignored in this process.
Well, I think this is
no
a theme
voters.
that's been going on for centuries, of course, isn't it? Scotland being ignored. Then we also have the response from the Scottish National Party's media department, and of course this is the usual mockery, because Johnson is so easy to mock. Let's face it. Johnson goes from Incredible Hulk to Incredible Sulk, says the SNP, and I think that really is an accurate summary of what happened today. SNP Westminster leader Ian Blackford has said today that in barely 24 hours Boris Johnson has gone from being the Incredible Hulk to the Incredible Sulk. It's a humiliating indictment of Boris's leadership that he turned on his heel and scurried away rather than facing questions today.
I mean, you find it remarkable that Boris Johnson is calling opposition parties who didn't vote for a general election on his terms chickens. And now he's running away from press conferences because he might be silenced out by people who don't agree with him. That's
many years ago I discovered, I think like a lot of, shall we say, more left-wing people, that the Tories have this habit of giving other people or judging them in the same by the same way that they judge themselves. In other words, if the Tories are doing something nasty and evil, they'll claim their opponents are doing something nasty and evil. If they're about to be really cowardly and run away from an argument, they'll claim that the opposition is cowardly and running away from the argument. This is a very, very old trope that the political class in the UK has used for decades.
We have gone from the Tories are these, Boris Johnson is this mighty political figure, he's going to get the job done, to a Prime Minister who leaves by the back door in Butte House. I think he left by the back gate, he didn't even get in the house in Luxembourg. All because of public opinion. You know, a good Prime Minister knows what he's doing, believes in it. I don't think Boris Johnson believes his own words.
Well, the other problem I think for Boris is that when he went to Luxembourg, he was in an environment which wasn't controlled by the Tory spin doctors. He wasn't in an auditorium which was full of invited guests and other Tories who were going to clap and cheer every time he said anything. It was a hostile environment, and the EU, I think, did nothing to lessen his discomfiture by choosing a restaurant that sold snails,
but, you know,
and to give him a fairly cheap lunch.
It's expected of leaders. I wouldn't call Boris Johnson a leader, I'd call him a shambles, but to be able to handle those situations, you know.
You would expect so. You would expect him to handle it with some dignity, at least.
He's the main representative of the UK abroad.
Indeed.
And he's running away like a...
Well, a coward, I think, is the word. We can use it with Boris this time. I can quote a little bit more from Ian Blackford's comments as well here from SNP's Westminster leader. He said that this is a government in headlong retreat and it's on its last legs. The meeting between Boris Johnson and President Juncker has confirmed that the UK government has failed to bring forward a single proposal to end the Brexit mess, and Boris Johnson must stop dealing in fiction and start addressing the facts. According to Ian, he says, last month Angela Merkel gave Boris 30 days to bring forward meaningful workable plans. 25 days in and he still hasn't got a single word of a proposal written. His homework is late, as they say.
Yes.
You can't go to Angela Merkel and say the dog ate my homework.
Yeah, and Brexit isn't something that I think I speak for most students. You can just write up the night before and somehow get I think that is the approach that Boris Johnson is trying to take. He'll just write something up the night before, send it in and hope for the best. That's not a stance that you can take with the future of so many people.
Indeed. There was a theory running around in social media yesterday that there was a loophole in Hilary Benn's Benn Act. This is the one which made it illegal for Boris Johnson to take us out without a deal. And in this theoretical situation, this loophole, apparently, if Boris were to come back to Westminster with a deal of any kind, let's say it was Mrs May's deal, but with the backstop removed, and laid it before Parliament and they voted upon it, then this loophole would mean that the law making no deal Brexit illegal would be avoided because of this action. Now, I don't know if this is true, I'm just reporting what I heard. And if he did this late enough, it would mean that we would exit without a deal, because this would just be a manoeuvre on his part. But it would be done so late that he could get away with it without being impeached, as it were. I have no idea whether this is actually true or not.
What I would say about that is that, thank goodness we had all the major opposition parties, including 21 Tory rebels who have decided to put country before party and defy the whip, and they've been unfairly punished for that. I remember the days where the Tory party was the party of the economy, the party of, tolerance,
party of business and
industry.
Yeah.
They've thrown all that away, and they're now the party of Brexit and the far right. If that loophole did exist, I don't think it does, because
I think it's a theoretical
It's
loophole.
a theoretical loophole, but I think when you've got the four main opposition parties, Labour, the SNP, Lib Dems, Plaid Cymru, the Greens, and everyone else who signed on, working on that bill to try and get it, someone would have went, hang on, that could lead to some issues. So I don't think that's really a factor.
I think there is a wee hole in it, but the window of opportunity for him to do it is so small. And Boris, well, he's not the brightest person in the cabinet himself, but he might have some clever strategies. He might see a method of using it. I noticed, I don't know if you heard this morning, but Dominic Raab was interviewed on the BBC's breakfast show this morning, and he said very carefully that no matter what happened, that Boris would not do anything illegal. He would not transgress UK law. Even if we crashed out without a deal, he would find a way to do that without breaking the law. That was the implication behind what Raab was saying, that he didn't specify what Boris was going to do, but whatever he did, it would be lawful.
I don't think Boris Johnson knows what he's going to do. I think he's in a trap. He can't get out of it. The only way out of it is for him to resign, which hopefully, for the sake of all of us, he does soon.
Before he's impeached.
He either breaks the law and gets impeached, or faces the courts, or he just abandons his biggest policy and takes the Tories into electoral disaster, which is another option I hope they do.
The other, because I do a lot of blogging, I hear a great deal from other political bloggers and writers, and one of the other theories that's doing the rounds at the moment is Boris is an expendable. He is a sort of kamikaze Prime Minister. His job is to deliver Brexit, no deal Brexit, and to take all of the flack that goes with it, so that the hard Brexiteers get their wish. I don't know if this is true or not. Wouldn't surprise me if there was a grain of truth in it. It would explain a lot of Boris's bizarre behaviour and his complete lack of anything meaningful to say.
But at the same time, if that was the case, would he have probed Parliament for a Queen's speech? I think he would just have called a general election, got it
proroguing
passed.
Parliament again was another one of his ways of avoiding scrutiny, so that he wouldn't have to face Parliament, he wouldn't have to argue or debate with them, and he wouldn't be subject to their scrutiny. And just by forcing everybody to go home, his little cabal can get on with whatever conspiracy they've managed to cook up between them.
But, if he's prorogued Parliament, if he was really what that story is going around says, only there to deliver Brexit, I think he would have called a general election, said, let me deliver Brexit, and then after he's delivered Brexit,
well, remember, he did try.
He would phase it out.
He did try to do it, but the opposition very cleverly circumvented it by saying, we'll take your general election, but not until this law which says that you can't take us out without it being illegal, to do a no-deal Brexit. Then we'll have a general election. As soon as that happened, he prorogued Parliament immediately, because he didn't want to have that general election knowing that it would be illegal for him to take the country out. So the only thing he could do, I think, was to delay the inevitable, and proroguing Parliament was his best bet.
Yeah.
And it is very, the word, undemocratic and irregular, to say the least.
Yeah. I mean, there's a general election coming. It's not a matter of if it comes, it's a matter of when. And, I think people of Scotland will send a very clear message to the likes of Boris Johnson that we are not for this shambolic mess you're making. We are not for this Brexit. We've never voted for Brexit. In fact, nobody born in this century.
62% of all of Scotland voted against it. Not a single constituency voted for it.
I think it's important to note that nobody this century voted for Brexit. Nobody voted at all in the referendum born this century. So the issue that's going to affect our generation most wasn't even made by us.
No,
we didn't even have a say.
The millennial generation's been completely shut out. And you're not going to get to vote on it until possibly after New Year, the way things are looking, or at least after Brexit has occurred.
I mean, even then, the sensible thing to do in a referendum and the gold standard is to give votes in all elections to 16-year-olds.
Well, in Scotland,
I
of course,
think
we
it's
have
unfair
that already, but the rest of the UK has yet to catch up with our democracy here and learn the lessons. I'd like, sorry, Callum, I'd just like to leave Brexit for a while and concentrate our combined firepower here onto the Liberal Democrats now, and particularly Joe Swinson. Now, Joe Swinson has been making a lot of, fighting talk, I think you would say, and she's being slammed, I think, as the media would say, by the other parties for gross hypocrisy. And all of the questions that she has yet to answer. And Kirsty Blackman said she had 20 questions for Joe Swinson, which she has failed to answer so far. Because the Lib Dems, of course, had very notoriously been in a coalition with the Tory party, Joe Swinson had voted along with the Tories for a number of very nasty policies. I'm pretty sure it was the rape clause, not one of them, that she didn't abstain on it. I believe she voted for it, and also the bedroom tax, and a number of other things that Joe Swinson went along with as a Liberal Democrat.
I mean, Joe Swinson has voted for more Tory welfare reforms than Michael Gove. I think it was Mike Russell that said, if you think Sleekick, think Michael Gove. Well, if you think hypocrite, think Joe Swinson. So there's nothing liberal about Tory welfare reforms.
No, there never has been.
There's nothing, I think if Nicola Sturgeon this weekend tweeted there's going to be more Tories in the Liberal Democrats than Lib Dems.
And I think she's probably right.
I think we're nearing it being level.
What the
number of Tories and the Liberal Democrats.
And in terms of the number of MPs now, it's almost balanced. And the Lib Dems have still got to try and catch up with the SNP though in terms of number of seats. I believe. I think the SNP is still slightly ahead. Yeah,
the Lib Dems have. I think at the last count it was 17.
17. Oh well, so still miles ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. Just moving this whole subject on a little further. Willie Rennie has also been in the news in the last day or so, making this huge speech about how he is not going to allow a second independence referendum in Scotland, as though he, was King Canute and able to turn back the tide, But he seems to be setting himself up as the Better Together poster boy, the only man left standing in Scotland against independence.
I mean, if Willie Rennie's the only positive case left for the Union, then I think they're in trouble. Even just this week, we've seen polls coming out saying that Scotland and Northern Ireland back either a border poll or a independence referendum. We've had 60% of Scots now want an early. I think it's 60%.
I think you're right.
Now want an early referendum. Polls showing increased support for yes. The Scottish Parliament has voted for it. The SNP, who has won the last, I think, nearly 10 elections, 4 of them on a mandate for a second independence referendum. There's nothing. Liberal Democrat. I mean, Joe Swinson's defied the word liberal, and now Willie Rennie's defying the word Democrat. I don't know who they are.
I don't think they know who they are either. I mean, they've gone from being a yellow party into a kind of dirty orange colour, which probably sums them up fairly well, actually. I've got to just quote a couple of things from some of the things that have come up which have been said today. And of course, Kirsty Blackman, MP, SNP MP in Westminster, has said Joe Swinson's hypocrisy on this is utterly grotesque and shows that she and her party are neither liberal nor democratic, pretty much echoing what you've just said, Callum. Her arrogance in thinking she can stand in the way of the electoral verdict of the people of Scotland is appalling. She and Willie Rennie are every bit as anti-democratic as Boris Johnson. Seems it's all right to have a referendum, a second referendum, if it's a Liberal Democrat referendum and if it's on Brexit, but not if you want independence.
I mean, how do you say it's a Liberal Democrat referendum? A referendum is one question asked, possibly two, but let's stick with one. You know, should Scotland be an independent country? Yes, no. And the line is over 50%. That's how you set a referendum. That's the gold standard. None of this, you can have your yes vote, but only if you get to a certain turnout. And I think at the next referendum we will see that high turnout that we saw in 2014, because people are absolutely scunnered by the lies, by the No campaign, the mess of Brexit, the total disrespect for Scotland, you know. I don't know if you remember when we submitted the alternative proposals for Scotland after Brexit. You know, I think the metaphor for that is it went to Theresa May's desk and she just put it in the bin.
Pretty much.
That's the respect that Scotland gets from Westminster.
Absolutely.
And the people of Scotland deserve so much more and so much better.
Well, let's leave Joe Swinson and move our conversation on to the recent events in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia's major oil processing plant appears to have been hit by what is claimed to have been a drone strike launched by Houthi rebels. And according to sources in the Pentagon, who are claimed to have kept an eye on this sort of thing, these Houthi rebels and these rather more sophisticated drones have been engineered or created somehow or other by the Iranians, and they're trying to link this Houthi rebel attack on the oil infrastructure in Saudi Arabia with the Iranian embargo at the moment. Now, it's a big stretch, I think, for anybody to make that connection. I can understand that the Houthis would want to strike at Saudi Arabia for the various bombing campaigns that they've had in Yemen recently. But the drone strike on the Saudi oil, well, it's basically a big refinery processing plant, but it's the biggest in the world. And the Saudis are claiming that the attack took out 5% of global oil production. Yes. And it's hard to imagine how that could possibly be. The pictures that we received in the news last night showed distant fire. It seemed to spread across the horizon, but I don't know about you, I didn't notice any big explosions or kind of things you normally associate with a major oil fire, or normally big fireballs and explosions. Didn't seem to see any of that. We haven't had any damage reports or close-ups of the damage done to the refinery.
I think the best thing to do is to send the UN or the relevant authority in to investigate before we start jumping. I mean, Trump's made his mind up, but I wouldn't trust a word that Trump says.
No.
At the same time, a lot of people will. I think the only way to settle that issue is to send the relevant authority in to do an investigation, work out what exactly is going on, and then we can get proper answers. It's no use jumping to whatever Trump says, whatever someone else says.
Another commentator said today that while all the bombing was going on in Yemen, where the Saudi-led coalition was bombing civilians, bombing schools, bombing hospitals, the West didn't take any notice. The media was completely silent. And yet, as soon as an oil refinery is hit by a drone in Saudi Arabia, it's, oh my God, the oil price is going to go up. Yeah. We seem to have our priorities rather skewed. Human lives don't seem to matter. It's the oil price that's most important.
I mean, on the subject of Saudi Arabia, we're buying arms, we're selling arms to them,
We sell a lot of weapons to
You know,
Saudi Arabia, probably more to them
and
than anybody else, I think.
Why? Why, when we get cases of what's going on in Yemen with the war there, the brutal killing of so many innocent lives, are we selling weapons to them? That's
we have. The funny thing about most people don't realise that Saudi Arabia and the United Kingdom are linked through royal lines, but they're also linked through the fact that Great Britain actually played a role in creating Saudi Arabia after World War II, where it basically handed over what was then Arabia to the Saud family, who were considered themselves to be the kings, the rightful kings of that area, and so the name Saudi Arabia stuck. But we've got this historic link with Saudi Arabia, just in the same way we have a special relationship with the United States. We have this other relationship with Saudi Arabia, which, on the face of it, is brilliant for our weapons manufacturing industry, because it means that we keep selling airplanes and missiles and bombs to them. But these are, as we've seen, being used against civilians in other parts of North Africa.
But at the same time, we're selling arms to people who are committing crimes, quite frankly, killing people.
War crime. It's a war crime
crimes,
to bomb a hospital deliberately, for example.
To bomb a hospital, innocent people are caught up in the actions of the Saudis in Yemen, and the UK are still selling arms to them. I think that's an abdication of our duty as a decent country.
It's all part of this big Western setup where they get their oil from Saudi Arabia. In exchange for that, they protect Saudi Arabia's interests and supply them with arms and weapons. And America obviously has an ally in Saudi Arabia, and ironically, Saudi Arabia is now an ally of Israel as well, in this strange axis of oil and power, which seems to emanate from America mostly. Anyway, let's move this subject on a little bit today, and we're now going to talk a little bit about United Kingdom workers being delayed holiday pay. And there's an article here in The Guardian, which we've got down in front of us there, and it looks at the fact that United Kingdom workers are basically being told that they're not to get holiday pay. And this is mostly people who are on low incomes, working no or zero hour contracts. So in other words, these people are hired almost on the spur of the moment, can be dismissed without any warning. They have no notice, they don't have any recourse to tribunals if they're sacked, and no holiday pay. And sick pay sometimes, no sick pay either.
Yeah, 0 hour contracts, quite frankly, should not exist. Everyone should have the right to a safe job, a secure job, know that they're going to be able to work, feed their family, supply heating to their kids. 0 hour contracts,
It basically allows...
What security does that give anyone?
It gives them none, does it? Because if you were an employer, you would want to just be able to hire and fire as you saw fit, without any rules.
Yeah.
But if you're an employee, you're basically selling your skills to somebody else in exchange for money, and that is to my mind, should be a contract involved in that, and that contract should be a contract of employment. And many years ago, I used to be a trades union man, and I was a member of the TUC, and I used to represent people at work on exactly this kind of thing. And I can tell you that both the Conservative Party and employers generally were always trying to wear down the rights of workers so that we didn't have things like breaks, or they could shorten their dinner breaks, shorten our holidays, put more of a burden on us for pensions, this sort of thing. And that's been going on and on since Margaret Thatcher's times.
Yeah.
Now it seems to be continuing with this business of having no legal right to holiday pay.
Yeah. It says,
if you're one of these 0 hours workers.
It says here that workers under the age of 25 and over 65 are most likely not to receive a pay slip.
How can that be? How is a company going to keep track of its taxes if it doesn't even keep track of who it's paying? And if you don't have a receipt for what's been paid, you have no leg to stand on if you have a claim saying that you haven't been paid, because you can't prove that you've even got a contract of employment. The whole thing is pretty ropey, I think. I mean, from your point of view, as a young person, you're coming into the workplace.
Yeah.
What do you think of this?
I mean, we've got young people under the age of 25 not qualifying for the UK living wage, despite working the exact same jobs. Example, a person behind the counter at a till could be paid £8 while their colleague is paid £10.
All dependent on age.
All
very
dependent on
arbitrary.
age. I mean, yeah, they're just opening a till, charging customers for the products. You know, I don't see a big.
Well, I see
difficult
this.
in that.
I agree with you. I mean, if you're under 25, let's say, and you're doing the same job as somebody who's 55, you should be able to get the same pay as that person for doing exactly the same job, but you won't because of the rules that allow employers to pay you less.
And it's even worse if you're a woman. The gender pay gap comes into factor. You know,
that gender discrimination persists.
I mean, quite frankly, Scotland needs the powers over employment rights, and they need them now.
I think
because
so.
This United Kingdom will not stand up for Scottish workers. They will not stand by them. The Scottish Parliament needs the powers to decide. The employment law needs the power to support workers, because let's face it, the UK is not going to do it.
Well, let's move on to something new. Now, talking of people's rights, it brings us to problems in Hong Kong. And you can't fail to have seen the escalating violence on the streets of Hong Kong recently. I noticed that Carrie Lam, whose name I always tend to forget when I'm trying to explain who she is, who was the island's administrator. Now, she is the administrator who has been selected by Beijing, by the Chinese government, to administrate the island, and she made herself rather unpopular because Beijing wanted to introduce a law which would allow them to extradite people from the island back to the mainland to be tried. And of course people didn't like that because they felt that this might mean that political activists in Hong Kong could be extradited to mainland China if the Chinese government thought of them as being troublemakers. And of course that was what sparked the original protest, the so-called umbrella protests, which were peaceful, as we saw earlier on. It was peaceful, it was young people walking about quietly with umbrellas. Now it's escalated to petrol bombs, bricks, rubber bullets, tear gas, and the usual panoply of strong-arm tactics that the police tend to employ when things get ugly. But the reason now for it is because, according to the reports from Reuters, that businesses in Hong Kong and the metro stations are being shut down by these protests. Effectively, it's crippling the economy of the island, and it's stopping the tourist trade, which is big in Hong Kong apparently. And the police are now using water cannons, and water cannons which are loaded with dye, which is an interesting way for them to find who the troublemakers were. By staining their clothes with this blue dye, they can identify who was at one of these events and who was involved in the battle with the police. So they're really ramping up the pressure. And mostly it is now about the guarantees that Hong Kong people want that they will have democratic rights when China finally takes over. I think it has another 20 years to go in this 50-year changeover between British rule and Chinese rule.
I mean, democracy is a world necessity. You know, those countries in a democracy have the responsibility to stand up for democracy. You know, the pro-democracy strikes are young people.
Mostly students, I think, who started
mostly students, young people, students, other generations coming together and going, no, we want a democracy. We want to have a say over our affairs.
Well, like us here in Scotland, the Chinese are fighting, or young Chinese people are fighting for their own future here. And they are worried that Beijing is not going to give them democracy, but is going to impose strict communist rule, as they have done in the mainland for decades. The Chinese government has recently backtracked a little bit and said that they are prepared to sort of come towards the protesters' demands and to introduce some form of democratic process into Hong Kong. But it's a very slow process. What did you make of the group of individuals who were pictured, I think it was last night, waving Union Jacks and playing God Save the Queen outside the British Embassy in Hong Kong? That was bizarre, I thought.
Yeah.
Adds a whole new dimension to this protest. Is there an element
I saw it, and at first I was like, but, now I'm thinking about it, and, you compare the Chinese level of democracy to what was the UK level of democracy, you can see the desire for that parliamentary democracy. And I think that's what they're calling out for. They want a parliament. They want to know that their say matters in an election. They want to know that they can decide who runs that area.
They're really looking for self-rule for Hong Kong. They're looking for Hong Kong to become like a little statelet with its own democracy, it seems. At the Baptist University, hundreds of students also marched to demand the university's management offer support to students and to a student reporter who was allegedly arrested on Sunday. The initial trigger for the protests was the contentious extradition bill, which has now been withdrawn, and that would have allowed people to be sent from Hong Kong to mainland China for trial. The protests have broadened into other demands, including universal suffrage, votes for everyone, one man, one woman, one vote, and an independent inquiry into allegations of excessive force by the police. So they're not backing down, these protesters. They seem to be in it for the long haul.
But,
it seems, 18 people were injured actually over the weekend, some of them seriously, according to the hospital authorities.
Yeah.
And the protests have weighed on the city's economy as it faces its first recession in a decade. So they're really piling the pressure on at a time when Hong Kong can ill afford it, I think. Back home now for the next story, and this is talking another story from The Guardian today about the Royal National Lifeboat Institution donations. And if I can just borrow this for a moment, Callum, the RNLI donations have surged after Tory criticism of how it works overseas. This is fascinating. The Royal National Lifeboat Institution has enjoyed a surge in donations after the charity was criticised for its work helping to save people from drowning abroad. And I'm wondering if this has got anything to do with migrants at all. Both the Times and the Mail Online had highlighted that the RNLI was sending millions of pounds to projects overseas at a time when it was facing a funding crisis that forced it to cut posts in the UK. The coverage included comments from 2 Tory MPs attacking the policy and led some donors to say that they would stop supporting it. The RNLI has reacted robustly, arguing that its mission has always been to save lives overseas as well as in the UK and in Irish waters. And people began to donate money to show their support for the charity's work in Africa and Asia. One donor said he had struggled to donate because the RNLI site had crashed under the weight of all of the people trying to donate at the one time. Yeah. So it seems that inadvertently whoever's complaining about this overseas work has actually sparked
we've got
a positive reaction.
As the article says, we've got the Tories who are responsible for welfare cuts that have led to the deaths of, I think, millions of people. Cruel policies, austerity, literally starving children, moaning that a charity that is responsible for saving lives at sea is saving lives at sea. I called Joe Swinson a hypocrite earlier on. I think the word applies there.
We also know that many of our emergency services do overseas work in disaster areas and flood zones. And this is true of the RNLI, which says creches for Bangladesh programme help reduce children's risk of drowning by ensuring that they have close supervision throughout the day. 40 children a day die from drowning in Bangladesh, and access to free creche places reduces a child's risk of drowning. In response to recent media pieces about life-saving work we're doing overseas, we've been encouraged to see a sharp increase in online donations. They also, in Zanzibar, have been teaching people to swim. The burkini, which is a full-length swimsuit, is innovative and cheap, and it's a way of enabling girls in strict Muslim countries to get into the water without compromising their modesty. So all of these things which we would see maybe as not benefiting us here are part of the international work the RNLI
But think of
undertakes.
the impact that's having to people across the globe. You know,
Can only be good,
can
surely.
only- yeah.
I think this is very much part of
I
the
think the
little
problem
England
with-
attitude that seems to
The
prevail
problem
in
with
the
that
press.
article and the Tories' opinion is that the Tories are too self-centred in their own little world. But, you know...
But it's almost saying that, that you
if
can
a
only
government-
save drowning people in the UK.
Yeah.
It's not okay to go abroad and help people there. It's Britain first, in other words.
Yeah.
This seems to be the
If
attitude.
a government was only to implement policies because the leader of that government thought, oh, that would benefit me,
Well, this is
it'd
it.
be, but this,
It's a
we've
different-
got the
Different way of thinking.
RNLI going out to other countries, teaching people how to swim, saving them from drowning,
Yeah, they teach
looking after
life-saving
people.
skills as well.
life-saving skills,
There's nothing wrong
There's-
in that,
there's
is there?
nothing
You can't
wrong
find
with
fault
it.
with it.
And I think that the people have donated, and I hope the surge continues.
I think it will actually, it appears to be continuing from what I can see from the report. It's
I
still
hope
surging at
people
this moment.
keep donating, because the work that emergency services do across the country, I think, are greatly underappreciated, and I don't think we show enough respect.
Well, many years ago, I used to sail, and I actually was in the business of sail making, so I was on the water a lot, and we would always, the RNLI was usually made up of friends of ours who would take the time off work to train and to launch the local lifeboat. And these guys were just ordinary people who gave up their time for nothing and were supported by the public. And somehow or other, some right-wing people have decided that they shouldn't be allowed to do that for foreigners for some reason, which seems to me to be a pretty much racist attitude almost to life-saving. It's just bizarre.
I mean,
Okay.
if you want a definition of Brexit Britain, that's Brexit Britain.
Yeah.
Closed
it's that
doors, no one
attitude.
else matters.
Yeah, no one else matters but the UK. Okay, speaking of people who matter, and young people in particular, brings us to our next story, which is the story about the Scottish education system. Particularly, this is a review of the senior years of secondary education in Scotland's schools. An independent review is to consider the implementation of curriculum for excellence for S4, S5 and S6 pupils. The Scottish Government says it will review the senior phase in schools to ensure that young people have the best possible opportunities. Now, the move comes as the Education and Skills Committee publishes its report on subject choices, which recommends a review of the senior phase. Now, you might know more about this than I do. What can you tell me about this this review?
Well, one thing I would say is that I was in school. I went through the exam process in the second year that they were introduced. So I was the second batch of the curriculum for excellence. The teaching was amazing. I wouldn't have said that at the time because I was a student and maths was boring. But the teaching was amazing. The teachers just got on with the work, and it must have been hard learning, having to go from one system to the old system, and they've done a fantastic job getting used to the new system. When it came down to exam choices, I was never stuck for choice. I left in 5th year, but I made the choices for 6th year. I wasn't stuck for choice. I had the choice
you
between...
didn't have your choices narrowed down or reduced in any way when you were at school?
I never noticed a reduction in my school.
Yet this is what seems to be at the root of this review, that there are claims that some pupils are having their choices curtailed. Now, I'm not sure
I think in
whether
some
this
schools...
is just anecdotally or whether there is a trend.
I think in some schools there might be a reduction, and that's what the review looks to find out. But in my school, Renfrew High, I wasn't curtailed of choice. I was supported to do whatever I wanted. The teaching staff were fantastic.
Okay.
Well, 6th year was the first year that I didn't do history, and that wasn't because of lack of choice. That was on the choice, but I chose to go into to try and get a National 5 at Modern Studies rather than doing advanced higher at history. I thought I'd save my history teacher, Mr. O'Malley, the pain of suffering me again.
Well, hopefully this review will actually find out if there is any deficiency or if there is a narrowing down of the choices being offered to students. But the fact that the government publishes this work shows that they actually are concerned about it, and they're open about the fact that if there's a problem, they're going to fix it.
And that's what
also
good government does.
Yeah.
They look at the problems and they go, okay, there seems to be a wee issue going on here, let's look at it, see what we can do to fix the problem. That's responsible government.
And they brought it into the public domain as well, so it can be examined by everyone.
Compare that to the UK, who shuts down Parliament, shuts down public scrutiny. You know,
Everything
Boris Johnson, who... I wouldn't be surprised if Boris Johnson holds his entire general election campaign in the forest that Theresa May did.
Could be, and maybe in the same scout hut. There's another quick story I wanted to run through because we're a bit short on time now. Support for the Royal Hospital for children and young people. Now we know that this new hospital had faced some problems after it was built because of some deficiencies in the air conditioning system and drainage in the site. And the opening of the hospital has been postponed until next year, I understand, while work is done to remediate these problems. And of course the Tory MSPs have leapt on this with glee as an SNP bad story. But the Minister concerned, Miss Freeman, has said that she's pleased to have swiftly appointed Mary Morgan in the role of Senior Programme Director. Now this will be the person who's dealing with the issues here. Mary comes with a wealth of experience within the NHS in Scotland, leading major change programmes, and will bring extensive expertise and knowledge to the role. And she will also work closely with the Scottish Government and senior management at NHS Lothian and oversee the safe delivery of the new Royal Hospital for Sick Children and Young People. Our overriding priority is that children and families who depend on these hospital services receive them in the safest way possible. The Tory party will be the first people to jump on the SNP if a hospital collapsed or something went wrong or somebody caught a pigeon disease of some description.
I think the Tory spin doctors just looking for stories. I mean, we saw last week they couldn't even put together an accurate press release. You know, that Nicola Sturgeon read out in First Minister's questions. You know,
indeed.
Sensible government is about protecting the vulnerable people. It's about looking after those who rely on the state. You know, if a child finds himself in need of a hospital, or if family is involved, they want to go to a safe hospital. They don't want to go to one that they know that your conditioning's faulty or
the sewage
the
is
roof could fall in.
Toilets,
you know,
or something. Yeah, it'd be the last thing.
I think that's the last thing a parent should worry about.
Well, we saw what happened with Labour's PFI project, with a whole series of schools collapsing around children because they were shoddily built and weren't. There was no oversight. Here, the SNP is managing these projects and overseeing them to make sure these problems are sorted.
And I think the difference between Labour's PFI scheme and the SNP is that we are learning from the mistakes of the Labour PFI scheme, because we don't want to see that ever happen again.
And I understand that new hospitals and schools are not built using PFI, they're built using a trust fund, which is not for profit, I understand. So the money raised internationally to buy and pay for these schools and hospitals is not making a fortune for somebody in the Cayman Islands.
No, but, you know, as I said, the Tories would probably jump on a climb down from the SNP, even if it was, you know, Nicola Sturgeon goes for a Jaffa cake and then changes her mind and takes up a digestive biscuit. You know, they claim SNP bad at that.
Oh yeah. Another story here, I think, which we really need to discuss before we run out of time, is the urgent need for immigration powers. Now, this is a subject which people get extremely angry about. We see day in and day out couples, families split apart because the hostile environment of the United Kingdom is forcing them out of Scotland, and we have no powers in Scotland to do anything to mitigate this in any way. Really, we can't stop them being deported or make them feel any more welcome than they already are.
I mean, I'm angry because people who have worked in Scotland for so many years as an EU national are now finding themselves worried that they might be sent home, because Scotland is their home.
It is,
it is their home.
As a student, you probably appreciate this as well, that the call for this from the SNP has come after the UK government has finally said this week that it would reverse its 2012 decision to scrap the post-study work visa for international students, allowing them to stay in the UK for 2 years after graduation to seek work. Now, this is just a tiny little
it's a tiny thing
backpedal by the UK government, but it's still not enough, is it? Not by any stretch of the imagination. We need full control.
The Scottish Parliament needs full control. Only the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish people can set the correct immigration policy for Scotland. You know, and if you look at Scotland's an open, inclusive, and generous country. We want to welcome people. We look at down south, particularly in the Tory party. They want to close the doors, shut up shop. You know, we're not in. Bye bye. See you later.
Send
go
them all
somewhere
back
else.
where they came from, and that seems to be the attitude.
And that's wrong. You know, Scotland needs immigration. Scotland has a population deficit, and if we can't find people to do the jobs that we rely on, you know, doctors, nurses, dentists, firemen, you know, teaching. You know, that's impacting the future generation and our safety.
Well, I had to.
You know, I don't think people realise that Brexit puts at risk so much of what we expect from. You know, the safety to know that the fire brigade are going to come. The safety to know that the fire brigade are going to come when there's a fire in your house. The safety to know that you're going to get treated by the NHS. The NHS, you know. I read somewhere, I think it was Alan Smith that told me that there's two choices. There were two choices in the Brexit referendum. You can either have Brexit or the NHS. And I think the people of Scotland and myself
that's a stark choice.
Will take the NHS any day of the week.
Our final story this evening, just before we run out of time, is the new funeral payment, which is being launched by the Scottish Government today, delivering a sixth social security benefit of the new benefits that Scotland has recently had devolved. And the payment, which is being delivered by Social Security Scotland, as opposed to Department for Work and Pensions or Social Security in the UK, this is the devolved Scottish version, and will help towards the cost of a funeral, and it replaces the funeral expenses payment previously operated by the DWP. The payment will help towards burial and cremation costs and some travel costs, and a flat a flat rate of £700 payment for people who don't have funeral plans. So at least, you know, in the time of dire need, when somebody who has no income and no method of paying for a funeral has got something that will help them.
This is the reason why we need independence. You know, you've got the contrast of a government who doesn't care about the most vulnerable, and we've got a government in Scotland that's working to support those at their most desperate time of need. The loss of a loved one is tragic enough on its own. What the DWP was doing was applying that extra pressure of, you know, not being able to afford to bury your loved one. Thankfully, we've got a Scottish Government who came in, stepped in and went, no, we know that it's your time of need and we will support you. And what I would say is the last point that I'm going to make is that you've seen the new social security system, you know, the new child benefit, the new, you know, all these different benefits coming in.
There's a cradle to grave service, because I was just thinking there as you were saying that, the baby boxes at the start of life, and the guaranteed funeral payment at the end. You really are looked after.
The welfare state is being restored in Scotland by the SNP and the Scottish Parliament, and just imagine what we could do with the full powers of independence, because we'd be the best country in the world to live, grow and work up if we had those powers.
Well, listen, on that very happy note, I think we're going to wrap it up for tonight. Callum, listen, thank you very much for being our guest this evening, for helping us to review the news and to comment on it as well from the point of view of young people in Scotland. As you know, ladies and gentlemen, that making television programmes in this day and age is expensive, and here at Broadcasting Scotland, that's just as true as any other television station. So we rely on you to help us make these programmes, and if you wish to try and help us to do that, then please sign up to be a subscriber to Broadcasting Scotland and to support our work with £5 a month. The details of how to do that will be on your screens at the moment. In the meantime, from me and the Scotland at 7 team, a very good night to you.